In the summer of 1934, a chunk of solid limestone cracked open on a rocky ledge in Texas. Inside the broken stone sat a wooden handle and a rusted iron head, a hammer sealed inside rock that formed long before humans existed. The object should not be there. If the rock is what geologists say it is, entire chapters of our timeline are simply wrong. And this is only the first one. History buried these. Listen. Number 10. The London Hammer. A wooden and iron hammer, sealed inside a limestone nodule that formed over 100 million years before the first human forged metal. Max Hahn and his wife were walking along Red Creek in London, Texas, when they spotted a rock with a piece of wood protruding from its surface. It was an odd shape, a smooth, dense oval nodule resting on the gravel bar, out of place among the flat limestone shards. They took it home. A few years later, Max chipped it open. Inside the solid limestone was a hammer. The wooden handle had turned to coal at the tip, petrified where it met the stone. The iron head was locked inside the matrix. The rock had grown around it. It was not dropped into a crevice. It was encased. Limestone takes time. It forms in slow, deliberate layers at the bottom of shallow seas, compressing sediment over countless seasons under the weight of the water above. The rock around this hammer was traced to the Ordovician period. That makes the surrounding stone roughly 400 million years old. The hammer itself, according to the metallurgical tests run decades later, was made of iron with a purity that requires modern smelting techniques. The wood was oak. This is the crack. 400 million years ago, there were no oaks. There were no humans. There was no smelting. The accepted geological timeline does not allow for a forged iron tool inside Ordovician rock. And yet, there it sits in a museum display, the handle still showing the grain of the wood, the iron still showing the rough marks of the forge. Skeptics point to the process of concretion. They argue the hammer fell into a pre-existing fissure in the older rock, and over a few centuries, mineral-rich water deposited new limestone around it, sealing it inside a modern nodule. It is a tidy explanation. It accounts for the artifact without rewriting history, but the petrified wood tells a different story. The handle was not merely surrounded by the stone. It had begun to fossilize at the exact point of contact, a process that requires immense pressure and thousands of years of mineral replacement. The rock and the tool aged together. If the concretion theory holds, the limestone nodule still had to form entirely around the hammer before the wood decayed in the open air. Oak rots. It falls apart in a few decades. The nodule formed around it fast enough to preserve the cellular grain, and then sat in a creek bed for an unknown length of time, waiting to be found. The alternative is worse. If the hammer was truly embedded in 400 million year old rock, we are not looking at a misplaced tool. We are looking at a glitch in the timeline. An object that existed before the world was ready for it, buried in a landscape that should have never known the sound of a blacksmith's strike. The forge marks are still visible. The iron is still solid. The question of who swung it is not. And yet, what was trapped in that Texas rock was ancient and still. Other rocks hold something far faster, a split-second blast of heat so violent it froze a bolt of lightning in mid-strike. At number 9. Fulgurites. When lightning strikes desert sand, the entire bolt freezes into hollow, branching glass tubes, a permanent fossil of a split-second blast of heat. Subscribe before we go any deeper. What comes next is the reason this video exists. A storm rolls across the Sahara. The air is dry, supercharged, the sky bruised purple and black. A bolt of lightning hits the dune. It reaches temperatures of 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. In a fraction of a second, the silica in the sand melts into a liquid. Then, as the bolt dissipates, the desert heat pulls the warmth away. The sand cools instantly. The hollow tube where the lightning traveled solidifies into glass. A fulgurite is born. They are called petrified lightning, and they are strange. Most fossils take thousands or millions of years to form. Bone slowly replaces with mineral. Wood turns to stone. A fulgurite forms in a heartbeat. It is a fossil of energy, not of life. A moment of absolute violence frozen in the earth. When you hold one in your hands, you are holding the exact path a billion joules of electricity took through the ground. The tubes are rough on the outside, coated in adhered, partially melted sand grains. But the interior is smooth, vitrified, a translucent tunnel of fused quartz that gleams when the light hits it. Picture it. Some fulgurites are small, no bigger than a finger, marking where a single branch of current terminated just below the surface. Others are massive. In the Libyan desert, a fulgurite was uncovered that extended over 20 feet into the ground, splitting into a dozen distinct branches, a subterranean root system of pure glass. The sand there is almost pure silica, making the glass exceptionally clear. When the loose sand is carefully brushed away, what remains looks like the skeleton of a bolt of lightning, suspended in midair, frozen in its final fraction of a second. The crack in our understanding lies in what is missing. The energy destroys what it touches. Any organic material in the strike zone is vaporized instantly. The sand itself is chemically altered, but the structure remains perfectly intact. The branching pattern follows the path of least resistance, the same pattern seen in the blood vessels of the human eye, the roots of a tree, the tributaries of a river delta. A single rule of physics, carving the same shape into the sand over and over. Geologists view them as simple thermal reactions. Electrical discharge meets silica results in lechatellite, a clean chemical formula, nothing unexplained. But standing in a desert littered with these glass roots, the explanation feels thin. The ground beneath your feet is holding a permanent record of a storm that passed in a second. The rain evaporated. The clouds broke. The wind smoothed the dunes flat again. But the glass skeleton is still there, hiding in the sand, a solid echo of a violent light. They are fragile. They shatter easily. Most are destroyed by the very weather that creates them, broken apart by the next windstorm or the next rain. But the ones that survive, buried deep beneath the shifting dunes, remain exactly as the lightning left them. Hollow, cold. The storm gone from the air but preserved forever in the stone. But lightning isn't the only thing that leaves impossible shapes in stone. Deep in the mines of South Africa, workers were pulling out something perfectly round, grooved by hand, and buried in rock 3 billion years old. Coming in at number 8. The Klerksdorp spheres. Miners in South Africa have extracted hundreds of metallic, deeply grooved spheres from rock dated at nearly 3 billion years old. Objects that balance too perfectly for nature to make. 3 billion years ago, the Earth was a hostile, lifeless sphere. The oceans were sterile. The atmosphere was toxic. The only things growing were colonies of single-celled bacteria, leaving slimy mats along the shallow water's edge. Nothing complex existed, nothing with hands or tools or a desire to carve. And yet, in a seam of rock that dates back to this ancient era, miners found something impossible. They were digging near Oudtshoorn, South Africa, in a deep formation of pyrophyllite, a soft, mineral-rich stone used for carvings and industrial molds. As the dynamite blasted and the heavy machinery tore into the earth, the workers started pulling out small metallic spheres. They ranged in size from a fraction of an inch to over 2 inches in diameter. Some were made of a solid, bluish metal. Others were a reddish, porous hematite. But they all shared one detail that stopped the miners cold. They were grooved, perfectly parallel lines carved into the equator of each sphere, wrapping all the way around. The grooves were crisp, uniform, and deeply set. They looked like they had been turned on a lathe, a machinist's mark pressed into stone that was over 2.8 billion years old. The world of the Klerksdorp spheres is one of crushing weight and deep time. Pyrophyllite is a sedimentary rock. It forms when volcanic ash and fine mud settle at the bottom of ancient lakes and oceans, compressing under the weight of millennia until the layers fuse. It is not a rock that preserves bones or footprints easily. It is a rock that swallows and flattens. But these spheres were not flattened. They were whole. The crack widens when you try to balance one of them. A local museum curator in Klerksdorp placed one of the reddish spheres on a flat glass display case. He rolled it. It stopped, wobbled slightly, and returned to its center, balancing perfectly on its single equatorial groove. The weight distribution inside the sphere was so even, so precise, that it resisted the pull of gravity. Nature does not balance things this well, not by accident. Geologists scramble for explanations. Some say they are concretions, natural nodules that form as minerals precipitate around a central nucleus. But concretions do not have parallel, lathe-like grooves. Others suggest the grooves were carved by ancient humans or early hominids. But the rock is 3 billion years old. There were no hominids. There was nothing with a brain. A fringe few whisper of ancient civilizations, of lost cycles of humanity, of a world that existed and died long before us. The theories fall short. They either demand a natural process that leaves lathe marks, or an intelligent hand that existed before life itself. Fast forward 3 billion years. The spheres sit in display cases and private collections. Over 200 have been found. They are hard. They are heavy. They roll true on their grooves. And they come from a time when nothing on this planet should have known how to make a straight line. They are perfectly round, perfectly grooved, and perfectly out of time. Those spheres survived the crushing weight of billions of years. And yet, strange as they are not the strangest things pulled from the deep. Far to the north, something far more fragile met the same fate, a soft, decaying organ that somehow refused to rot away. Down to number 7. The Sussex iguanodon brain. A piece of fossilized brain tissue, soft, vulnerable meat, survived 130 million years in a muddy swamp, preserving the physical shape of a dinosaur's thoughts. Brains do not fossilize. They are made of water and fat suspended in delicate membranes. When an animal dies, the brain is the first thing to decay. Bacteria consume it from the inside out, leaving an empty skull within days. Bone survives, teeth survive, horns and claws survive, but the organ of thought, the soft tissue of consciousness, dissolves back into the earth. This is a rule of paleontology. And then in a dark patch of rock in East Sussex, England, the rule broke. In 2004, a fossil hunter named Jamie Hiscox was walking along a beach near Bexhill. He spotted a strange brown stone on the shore. It was flat, textured, and covered in shallow, winding ridges. It did not look like a bone. It looked organic. It looked like the surface of a brain. He picked it up and took it to an expert. The expert was Dr. David Norman, a paleontologist at the University of Cambridge. When he saw the stone, he was skeptical. And then he looked closer. The ridges were not random. They were the exact pattern of meninges, the tough, fibrous membranes that protect the brain. The fossil was an endocast, a natural mold of the inside of a skull. But this was not just a mold. This was the actual tissue, mineralized, turned to stone. The world of the Sussex brain is a prehistoric swamp. 130 million years ago, an iguanodon, a massive, plant-eating dinosaur, died in a shallow, stagnant lagoon. The water was toxic, stripped of oxygen, heavy with decaying plant matter. The carcass sank into the muck. Normally, the brain would have rotted away instantly. But the water was so acidic, so utterly devoid of oxygen, that the bacteria that caused decay could not survive. The brain was pickled. Then the weight of the mud. Over millions of years, the soft tissue was replaced by minerals. The blood vessels, the folds, the delicate covering of the brain all turned to brown phosphate. The shape remained. The substance changed. The crack is the preservation itself. We have dinosaur bones. We have dinosaur eggs. We have dinosaur footprints. We do not have dinosaur brains. The chances of this happening are astronomically low. Every single condition had to be perfect. The animal had to die in water deep enough to sink, shallow enough to avoid scavengers. The water had to be acidic enough to tan the tissue, but not so acidic it dissolved the bone. The sediment had to fall in a steady blanket, pressing the brain flat but not destroying its topology. 100 million years of shifting Earth, rising seas and eroding cliffs had to leave this one stone untouched on a beach, waiting for a human eye to spot it. Skeptics argue it is simply a well-preserved endocast, a sediment infill of the skull cavity, not the actual brain tissue. They say the meninges are just mineral staining, but high-resolution scans show otherwise. The structures are vascular. They branch and thin the way blood vessels branch and thin. The mineral density matches organic tissue, not inorganic sediment. It is a dark thought, to hold the shape of a dinosaur's mind in your hands, to see the folds where its instincts lived, the ridges where its vision processed. The animal is dust. The thoughts are gone, but the architecture of the organ remains, a ghost of a consciousness that walked the earth 130 million years ago, waiting in the rock to be recognized. Flesh turning to stone is rare enough. But what about stones that look like the work of a machinist? On a slab in Russia, the spirals of ancient life look exactly like modern hardware. Number 6. The Kaluga crinoid fossils. A rock slab pulled from a Russian riverbed is covered in what look like perfectly threaded metal screws. But they are the fossilized remains of sea creatures that lived 400 million years ago. The Oka River cuts through the Kaluga region of western Russia, exposing banks of dense gray limestone. For centuries, locals walking the riverbanks have picked up strange stones. The rocks are studded with small, spiral objects. They look like steel screws, complete with raised threads and flat heads, pressed into the stone as if someone had driven a box of hardware into wet mud and left it to harden. When you hold one, the urge to turn it in your hand is immediate. The grooves are uniform. The spirals are tight, they look machined. But they are not metal, they are not screws, they are crinoids. 400 million years ago, this part of Russia was a shallow tropical sea. Crinoids, commonly called sea lilies, dominated the ocean floor. They were not plants. They were echinoderms, relatives of the starfish and the sea urchin. They anchored themselves to the seabed with long, segmented stems, waving their feathery arms in the current to catch passing plankton. When the crinoid died, its stem fell apart. The individual segments, called columnals, scattered across the ocean floor. These columnals are the source of the illusion. In certain species of crinoid, the columnal was shaped like a small, heavily ridged disc with a central hole. When these discs settled into the sediment, they often aligned and stacked on top of one another. Over millions of years, the organic material was replaced by silica and iron minerals, staining them a dark, metallic gray. The result is a fossil that looks exactly like a threaded screw. Look closer. The crack in our understanding is not a geological mystery. It is a perceptual one. The human brain is a pattern-matching engine. We see faces in the clouds. We hear voices in the static. And when we see a tight, uniform spiral with a raised ridge, we do not see a fossilized marine invertebrate. We see a fastener. We see industry. We see ourselves. The arguments come quickly. Some point to these stones as proof of ancient machining, of lost technological empires that predate the dawn of complex life. They hold the rocks up to the light and trace the perfect threads with their thumbs. But the perfection is an artifact of biology. The ridges on the crinoid columnal were anchor points for ligaments. They needed to be uniform so the stem could flex without snapping. The spiral is merely the result of the disc's rotation as it sat in the current, the sediment filling the gaps in a perfect, winding ramp. And yet, holding one of these stones, the rational explanation does not entirely kill the feeling. The fossil is a ghost of a machine that never existed. The animal has vanished, its flesh rotted away, its purpose forgotten. But the shape it left behind is so familiar, so deeply human, that the rock feels like a message. A thread reaching out from 400 million years ago, waiting for a screwdriver that would not be invented for another 399,990,000 years. Everything so far has been the shallow water. From here on, the floor drops out, because if rocks can trap metal, glass, and flesh, they can also trap movement itself. Walking across ceilings where gravity insists nothing should ever step, At number 5. The Permian Trackways. Hundreds of reptile footprints stretch across the ceiling of a Kentucky cave, upside down, perfectly preserved, as if the animals walked on the sky itself. In the deep, lightless passages of a cave in eastern Kentucky, the ceiling is alive with footsteps. They are not the steps of modern explorers. They are the prints of small, reptilian animals pressed into the solid rock overhead. Dozens of them, hundreds. Some are isolated, a single three-toed mark in the limestone. Others are long trackways trailing off into the darkness, the stride even and purposeful. To stand beneath them is to feel the world invert. The ground is empty. The sky is walking. The world of these trackways is the Permian period. 290 million years ago, long before the first dinosaur, the land was ruled by the synapsids, thick-bodied, low-slung reptiles with sprawling gaits. Near what is now Kentucky, these animals walked across the muddy banks of a shallow, seasonal lake. The mud was fine-grained, wet, and plastic. Every step left a deep, crisp impression. The sun baked the mud hard. The rain fell, depositing a thin layer of fine sediment over the tracks, sealing them. Over geologic ages, the mud turned to limestone. The tracks turned to stone. Then the mountain turned. Tectonic forces pushed the ancient seabed upward. The limestone buckled, folded, and rotated. Entire cliffs were flipped on their sides or upside down entirely. The rock that was once the ground became the roof of a cave. The mud that was once the floor of a lake became the ceiling of a dark, subterranean chamber. The crack is the gravity of it. The logical explanation that the rock flipped is geologically sound. It happens all over the world. But standing in the cave, logic does not govern the senses. The senses say the tracks are above you. The senses say something walked on the ceiling. The weight of the stone, the depth of the impression, the way the mud pushed up between the toes, it all looks fresh. It all looks down. Some have suggested the animals walked on the ceiling of an air pocket, somehow clinging to the roof of a subterranean void. It is a nonsense theory, born from the sheer, visceral unease of looking up and seeing a footprint. The truth is tectonics. The mountain turned. The sky became the ground. The footprints, baked into the mud on a sunny afternoon 290 million years ago, now hang in the dark. The sediment that covered them is gone, eroded away by water and time, revealing the prints in negative relief. They protrude from the ceiling, casting long shadows in the beam of a flashlight. They look like they are reaching down. The ground beneath our feet keeps shifting what we think we know. And sometimes, the rock doesn't hold the ancient past. Sometimes, it holds something that looks like it came off a 20th century assembly line. Coming in at number 4. The Coso Artifact. A rock hound cracked open a geode in the California desert and found a modern, manufactured spark plug encased inside 500,000 years of mineral deposits. In the spring of 1961, 3 rock hunters were digging in the Coso Mountains, east of Bakersfield, California. The desert floor was littered with geodes, rough, round nodules of volcanic rock that hide crystals inside. Mike Mikesell, Wallace Lane, and Virginia Maxey collected a few promising specimens and took them home. Mikesell put one on the saw. The blade bit into the hard, outer crust of chalcedony. Then it hit something it couldn't cut. Metal. Inside the nodule, lodged in the center of the rock, was a small, metallic cylinder. It was about an inch long, encircled by a ring of corroded metal, with a small, ceramic pin in the center. It looked exactly like a spark plug, and it was completely encased in stone that appeared to be 500,000 years old. The world of the Coso artifact is one of harsh light and dry, abrasive dust. The geode was not a hollow crystal cavity. It was a solid nodule of hard clay and rock with a thick, hardened rind. The interior was filled with a softer white material, and embedded in that white material was the 20th century machine part. The metal was rusted. The ceramic was intact. The rock had formed around it, mirroring its shape perfectly. The crack is the time. If the nodule took 500,000 years to form around the spark plug, The artifact predates the internal combustion engine by 499,900 years. The timeline snaps. The theories spiral. One camp insists it is proof of time travel, or a remnant of a forgotten industrial civilization that walked the Earth before the last ice age. Another camp points out the obvious. It is a champion spark plug, Model D8, manufactured in the 1920s. There is no mystery about what it is. The only mystery is how it got inside the rock. Skeptics argue the nodule formed rapidly. A spark plug dropped by a miner in the 1920s could have been buried in the soft, alkaline mud of the dry lake bed. The mud can harden quickly under the desert sun, creating a concretion that mimics the appearance of an ancient geode. It is a compelling, rational argument. Concretions can form in decades, given the right chemical conditions. But the rock hunters who cut it open maintained that the stone was not a soft, recent concretion. They claimed it was hard, with a crystalline structure that required a diamond saw to cut. The mineralization inside the cavity was layered, suggesting a slow, deliberate deposition of silica over a long period. The artifact itself has since been lost. It sits in a private collection unavailable for modern analysis. We are left with photographs and accounts, the shadow of a controversy, but the image remains. A machine wrapped in stone, a modern heart in an ancient body. The spark plug sat in the desert, waiting to be cracked open, a piece of the present buried in the past. A modern machine, sealed in ancient time. But what if the rock itself is the anomaly? In quarries around the world, stone is holding something vertical that should have fallen flat. A forest turned to stone while standing up, cutting straight through millions of years of earth. Down to number 3. Polystrate trees. Giant petrified trees stand vertically through dozens of rock layers that textbooks say took millions of years to form, meaning the trees would have had to stand dead and rotting for epochs without falling over. In a shale quarry near Joggins, Nova Scotia, a cliff face tells a story that makes no sense. The rock is layered in horizontal bands of dark gray stone and thin black coal. Each layer represents a distinct period of time, a swamp that dried up, a forest that grew, a flood that buried it. But cutting straight through all of them, standing entirely vertical, are massive petrified tree trunks. They pierce the layers like a spike driven through a deck of cards. The world of the Joggins Cliffs is the Carboniferous period. 300 million years ago, this was a vast, steaming swamp. Giant lycopsids, scale trees that grew over 100 feet tall, dominated the landscape. When the trees died, they would often fall into the swamp muck and decay. But sometimes, a standing dead tree would be buried by a sudden influx of sediment from a flooded river. The sediment filled the hollow trunk, and over time compressed into rock. Picture the math. The cliff at Joggins is 40 feet high. The rock layers that make up those 40 feet represent, according to traditional geological estimates, hundreds of thousands of years of slow, steady accumulation. Mud settling to the bottom of a shallow sea, plants dying and compressing into peat, more mud, more peat. Each layer is a page in a very slow book, but a dead tree cannot stand for 100,000 years. It rots, it falls. It turns to dust long before the mud can pile up around it to a height of 40 feet. The crack is the verticality. The tree does not lie flat. It stands. The roots are at the base. The trunk extends upward, crossing the boundaries of the rock layers without deviation. The mainstream explanation holds that the trees were buried rapidly in a single, continuous event. The sediment filled in around the tree quickly before it had a chance to rot and collapse. The layers then formed horizontally around the buried trunk over the subsequent millennia. It is a reasonable theory. Rapid burial does happen. A massive flood can dump feet of sediment in a matter of days. But at Joggins, there is not just one tree. There are dozens, and they cut through multiple distinct seams of coal, seams that are supposed to represent fully formed, mature forests that grew and died over long periods of time. If the tree stood through the growth of 3 separate forests, It would have to stand for millions of years. The logical loop collapses in on itself. The competing theories are stark. Either the rock layers are not as old as we think, or the layers did not take nearly as long to form as we calculate. If the Earth can deposit 40 feet of layered, fossil-rich rock in a rapid, catastrophic event, then our entire system of reading time in the stones is flawed. The pages of the book are not sequential chapters. They are a single, violent moment, pressed hard into the earth. The trees stand in the cliff face, silent and heavy. Their bark is still visible, pressed into the rock. They are not lying down. They are pointing at the sky they knew 300 million years ago, a sky that no longer exists, holding up the layers of a world that tried to bury them. Time, it seems, does not always stack neatly. It bends. And deep in the Australian outback, the rock does something even stranger than bending time. It turns bone into fire. Number 2. The Lightning Ridge opalized fossils. Dinosaur bones found in the Australian desert are not stone. They are glowing, neon opal, their skeletal structures replaced by precious gemstone that flashes with every color of the spectrum. The bone is not bone. It is not heavy, mineralized stone. It is light. It catches the sunlight and refracts it, splitting the beam into neon greens, electric blues, and deep, bruised reds. When you hold it in your hand, you are holding a piece of a dinosaur that looks like it was carved from a Las Vegas sign. The world of Lightning Ridge is a sun-blasted, dusty patch of the Australian outback, 1,000 miles from the nearest coast. 110 million years ago, this was not a desert. It was the edge of the Eromanga Sea, a vast, shallow inland ocean teeming with marine reptiles and bordered by thick forests of conifers and ferns. Dinosaurs walked the muddy shores. Plesiosaurs hunted the warm water. When these animals died, their bones settled into the muddy bottom of the sea, buried in a sediment rich in volcanic ash and silica. The crack is the replacement. Under normal circumstances, bone fossilizes as minerals in the groundwater slowly replace the organic cells, turning the bone a dull brown or gray. But at Lightning Ridge, the water was heavily laden with dissolved silica from the ancient volcanoes. As the bones decayed, this silica-rich water seeped into the microscopic cavities. It filled the Haversian canals, the tiny tubes that carry blood through living bone. It filled the spaces left by the decaying cells. And there, under the right conditions of pressure and chemistry, the silica formed microscopic spheres. These spheres stacked in perfect, orderly lattices. When light hits these lattices, it bends. It interferes with itself. It produces the phenomenon known as play of color. The bone was gone. In its place was opal. Look closely. The replacement is so precise that paleontologists can still see the cellular structure of the original bone under a microscope. The opal did not just fill the shape of the femur or the vertebra. It mapped the biology, cell by cell. It copied the architecture of the marrow. It preserved the growth rings of the animal in brilliant, flashing fire. Some argue this is simply a geochemical accident, a rare alignment of pH, temperature, and silica concentration that happens to occur in this one patch of Australian dirt. And yet the precision of the copy is haunting. Nature is rarely this faithful. Erosion destroys, pressure distorts, time flattens. But here, the earth swallowed a skeleton and spat it back out as jewelry. The miners who dig these fossils out of the dark shafts often face a grim choice. A rare, opalized dinosaur tooth might be worth a fortune as a gemstone, cut and polished for a ring. As a scientific specimen, it is priceless, but it pays nothing. The fire of the opal is a trap. It tempts the finder to destroy the shape, to cut the bone apart to sell the color. The ones that survive end up in museums, sealed behind glass, glowing under the exhibit lights. The animal died in the mud. The mud turned to fire, and the fire is still burning, 100 million years later, trapped in the shape of a creature that no longer exists. And this one, strange as it is not yet the strangest, not even close, because the deepest cut of all wasn't found buried in a mountainside. It was pulled from the bottom of the sea, and it rewrites what we believe our ancestors were capable of. Number 1, the one you came for. The Antikythera mechanism. Divers recovered a corroded lump of bronze from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck that turned out to be a complex analog computer with over 30 interlocking gears, built 1,000 years before such technology should have existed. A storm sank the ship somewhere around 60 BC. It went down off the rocky coast of Antikythera, a small island between Crete and the Peloponnese. The vessel was Roman, carrying a cargo of luxury goods, bronze statues, glassware, fine pottery. It settled into the deep, dark mud of the Aegean seabed, buried in the silt where the oxygen couldn't reach. The wood rotted, the iron corroded, the sea ate the ship. But the bronze survived, coated in a thick, protective crust of marine limestone and concretion. It slept in the dark for 2,000 years. In the spring of 1901, a team of Greek sponge divers found the wreck. They dove in heavy canvas suits, breathing air pumped from the surface, risking their lives in the deep water. They hauled up statues, coins, and amphorae, and they hauled up a lump of rock. It was about the size of a large dictionary, encrusted in barnacles and calcareous deposits. It was set aside, dumped in a crate with the other unremarkable debris, and shipped to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Months later, the lump dried. It cracked. A piece of the rocky crust fell away, revealing something that should not have been there. A gear. The world of the Antikythera mechanism is the Hellenistic period, the era of Archimedes and the Library of Alexandria. It was a time of intellectual explosion, of geometry and astronomy, but nothing in the historical record suggested the Greeks had built anything like this. The crust fell away to reveal a compact, densely packed gearbox. It was made of thin, triangular bronze plates, held together by a main plate and a pin. It was covered in inscriptions, a user manual, etched in tiny Greek letters on the front and back covers. The crack is the complexity. X-rays and CT scans would later reveal over 30 meshing gears, hidden inside the casing. The largest gear is nearly 5 inches in diameter and contains over 220 teeth. The gears turn on different axes, transmitting motion through a complex system of epicyclic gearing, including a differential, a mechanism that allows 2 inputs to be combined into 1 output. This is the same principle used in the drive axle of a modern car. The device was an analog computer. You turned a handle on the side, and the gears computed the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. It tracked the phases of the moon, predicting eclipses with startling accuracy using the Saros cycle, a period of exactly 223 lunar months. It tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. It even accounted for the irregular, elliptical orbit of the moon, a phenomenon that wouldn't be mathematically explained until Johannes Kepler figured it out in the 17th century. The Greeks built a machine to simulate the cosmos, 1,400 years before the first mechanical clocks appeared in Europe. How did they cut the gears? They had no lathes. How did they calculate the gear ratios? They had no algebra. How did they forge the bronze so thin? They had no precision tools. The standard explanation is that this was the pinnacle of Hellenistic craftsmanship, a singular masterpiece of an otherwise unrecorded tradition. It implies a whole school of mechanical engineering, generations of gear cutters and astronomers working together, a lineage of machines that rose, peaked, and vanished without leaving a single trace in the archaeological record. No other fragment of this technology has ever been found. No literary description matches its complexity. A fracture. The mechanism sits in the museum today, broken into 82 fragments. The bronze is crumbling, the plates warped by 2 millennia of pressure. Half the inscriptions are unreadable. We can see the shape of the knowledge, but we cannot hold it. Whoever built it understood the sky with an intimacy that rivals our own. They turned that understanding into metal, into moving parts, into a ticking clockwork model of the universe. And then, the knowledge died. The ship took it to the bottom of the sea. The workshops burned. The gear cutters faded into history. The dark ages of mechanics descended, and for 1,000 years the stars moved without anyone to track them with bronze. The gears sit behind glass, silent and cold. The handle is frozen. The cosmos it computed is gone, but the teeth remain, interlocking in the dark, waiting for a hand to turn them again. In 1929, historians found a piece of gazelle parchment in Istanbul. It was a map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, and it showed the coastline of Antarctica, a continent that would not be officially discovered for another 300 years, drawn not as it is today, but as it was before the ice came.